No matter where you ride, you need a motorcycle that works for you. Because suspension tuning is not an exact science, there is no one setup that meets every rider's needs. However, there are a few basic adjustments that every rider can make to improve suspension performance. This video covers basic suspension setup for most Japanese and European off-road motorcycles. Be sure to check your owner's manual for specific suspension tuning and service procedures for your model. Setting up your suspension will only be effective if your motorcycle is in good working condition. Proper maintenance is essential for safety and good suspension performance. With the bike on the ground, check to make sure your suspension moves freely. Push down several times on the rear end of your motorcycle. If you feel any binding or stickiness, you may need to service your linkage and swing arm. The front fork action should be smooth and even. If there is any stickiness, check the fork pinch bolts and axle clamps for proper installation. Now, with the bike on a stand, check the wheel, linkage, and steering bearings for wear and damage. To check the wheel bearings, steady the bike with one hand and pull the wheel from side to side with the other. If you feel any play, remove the wheel and inspect the bearings. After hours of abuse, linkage bearings can become worn. To check the bearings, put one hand on the seat and with the other pull up slightly on the rear wheel. A small amount of play is normal. If you feel an excessive amount of play, inspect the linkage and shock heim bearings for wear and damage. This is a good time to check the shock for leakage. Inspect the shock shaft for any signs of oil leakage or damage. If you see any oil leakage, take the shock to a trained technician for repair. An improperly adjusted chain can cause the suspension to bind or the chain to fall off. If needed, adjust the chain to the manufacturer's specification. Check the steering head bearings by turning the handlebars from side to side. The movement should be free and easy. If the steering feels notchy or rough, service the steering head bearings. Check the front wheel bearings using the same procedure you use to check the rear wheel bearings. Inspect the fork tubes for nicks and scratches. Even the smallest scratch can cause the fork seals to leak. By pulling back and forth on the bottom of the fork legs, you can check the steering bearings for play. Sag is how much the suspension compresses when you sit or stand on your motorcycle. The reason for setting sag is to obtain the optimum ride height, which affects suspension action and handling. To check sag, put the bike on a stand, then measure from the center of the rear axle straight up to the edge of the rear fender. Mark the fender and record the measurement. Now, with the bike off the stand, have the rider, dressed in full gear, stand on the bike in his normal riding position while a friend holds the bike. Remeasure from the axle to the mark on the fender. Subtract this second number from the first number to get the sag measurement. As a general rule, the sag should be 1/3 the bike's total rear wheel travel, or 90 to 100 millimeters for most modern off-road motorcycles. An alternative way to measure the sag is to have the rider sit on the bike in normal riding position with his feet hanging. To adjust the sag, put the bike back on the stand, then, using a hammer and punch, or spanner wrench, loosen the lock nut on top of the shock's preload collar. Now, using your hands, turn the spring to tighten it or loosen it. Too much sag means you need to tighten the spring. Too little sag means you should loosen the spring. Recheck the sag and make the needed adjustments until you obtain the correct measurement. Free sag is how much your bike's rear suspension compresses on its own with no rider on board. To find the free sag, the bike should be on the ground, resting under its own weight. Measure from the axle to the mark on the fender. Subtract that number from the very first measurement you made to get the free sag. The free sag should be between 18 and 32 millimeters. If the free sag falls out of this range, or you are unable to adjust the sag to the proper specification, you will need to replace the shock spring. Consult your service manual or a suspension shop for the correct spring. The proper compression and rebound adjustments can make the difference between riding your motorcycle and wrestling with it. All compression and rebound adjustments are made by counting the number of clicks out the adjusters are from all the way in. The compression adjuster controls how much force or how hard it is to compress the shock. Turning this adjuster in, clockwise, makes the suspension stiffer, while turning the adjuster out, counterclockwise, makes it softer. The rebound adjuster controls how fast the shock returns to its fully extended position. Turning the rebound adjuster in makes the suspension return slower, while turning it out makes it return faster. As a general rule, the rebound adjuster should never be turned out less than 10 clicks. A good base setting for the compression adjustment is between 10 and 12 clicks out. The rebound should be between 12 and 14 clicks out. These are base settings only. Fine adjustments will need to be made to suit the rider and track conditions. The compression adjuster on most shocks is at the top of the shock. Using a screwdriver, turn the adjuster in until it stops. Do not force the adjuster any further than it will go on its own. Now, turn the adjuster out, counting the clicks as you go, until you reach the desired adjustment. Some late model bikes have a high-speed compression adjuster that controls compression during big hits, like landing off a big jump. The high-speed adjuster looks like a nut located around the outside of the compression adjuster. Use a T-handle or socket to turn the adjuster. Instead of counting clicks, you'll need to count turns. A good base setting for the high-speed adjuster is between 1 and 2 turns out. The rebound adjustment is located at the bottom of the shock by the linkage. Turn the adjuster in until it stops. Then back it out to the desired setting. The compression and rebound adjustments for the forks operate in the same manner as shocks. The locations of the adjuster vary, so check your owner's manual. The forks shown here have the rebound adjusters on top and the compression on the bottom. Before making any adjustments, back the air bleed screws out to release built-up pressure in the forks. The air bleed screws are the small, off-centered screws located atop each fork cap. It's a good idea to bleed the air from the forks after each time you ride. The built-up air can make the forks harsh and put undue pressure on the seals. Bleed both forks, making sure to re-tighten the screws before riding the bike. The rebound adjuster for the forks is located in the center of each fork cap. Turn each adjuster all the way in, then back out to the desired setting. Be sure to adjust both forks the same to ensure smooth, consistent action. The compression adjusters on the forks are located at the bottom. You may need to remove any disc guards or rubber plugs to reach the adjusters. Use a small flathead screwdriver to make the desired adjustment to each fork leg. Be sure to reinstall the rubber plugs and disc guard if your bike came equipped with them. It's a good idea to keep a record of the compression and rebound adjustments for both the forks and shock. Detailed records will help you make suspension adjustments to suit different riding conditions and diagnose suspension problems. Now that you've set your sag and made preliminary compression and rebound adjustments, it's time to fine-tune your suspension for the terrain you're riding on. To achieve success, you need to tackle one end of your motorcycle at a time. Begin with the shock and adjust the compression damping first. Pick a section of your riding area that has some potholes, a big jump, or both. Ride the section several times, paying particular attention to how the rear suspension feels. Is it bottoming? Bottoming is when all of the suspension travel has been used. If you're not sure the bike is bottoming, look for tire marks under the rear fender. or see if the cap on the shock body looks polished. If you determine your bike is bottoming, turn the compression adjuster in clockwise 2 clicks. Now, ride the bike through the same section again. If it still bottoms, keep making compression adjustments until the shock no longer bottoms. If your bike is equipped with a high-speed adjuster, try turning it in a quarter turn until the bottoming stops. If you get to the point where you've turned the adjuster all the way in, turn it back out 1/2 turn. Then continue making adjustments using the low-speed compression adjuster. Are you still bottoming? This is where honesty becomes important. Are you landing short on a jump or slamming into a big ditch? Sometimes suspension tuning involves changing your riding style rather than the suspension. If you've turned the compression adjuster all the way in and the shock still bottoms, you may need to have your shock serviced, revalved, or have a stiffer spring installed. If the shock never bottoms, back the compression adjuster out until the shock bottoms. Then turn it back in 2 clicks. After you're satisfied that the shock is no longer bottoming, ride your motorcycle through an area with some small bumps. The shock should soak up small bumps without feeling harsh or causing the bike to bounce all over the place. If the shock feels harsh, back out the compression adjuster 2 clicks. Ride the bike and continue making adjustments until you are satisfied. The final setting for the compression adjuster will be made after you set the rebound, so don't worry about fine-tuning right now. To set the rebound adjuster, find a section in your riding area that has some whoops or series of rolling bumps. Ride through the section at a good, even pace, paying attention to what the back of the bike is doing. The bike should track fairly straight. If the rear of the bike swaps or kicks from side to side, the rebound setting is too slow. This is called packing. Packing is when the shock is compressed by one bump and rebounds so slowly that it doesn't have enough time to absorb the next bump. Stop the bike and back the rebound adjuster out 2 clicks and ride the section again. Keep making adjustments until the bike stops swapping. Another sign that the rebound may be set too slow is if the back of the bike wants to ride high when jumping. When this happens, the suspension compresses on the face of the jump, but when the bike leaves the jump, the shock can't rebound fast enough. This leaves the shock in a compressed state, allowing the weight and momentum of the rear wheel to carry the rear of the bike upward at an accelerated rate. Again, back the rebound out 2 clicks at a time until the problem stops. Here's where things get a little tricky. If the rebound setting is too fast, the bike may swap, or the back end might ride high over jumps just like when the rebound is too slow. In this case, turn the rebound adjuster in 2 clicks at a time until the problem is solved. It may take you some time to distinguish the difference between when the rebound is too fast and when it's too slow, but you'll develop a feel for it over time. Once you're satisfied with the rebound adjustment, ride the bike around your test area at your normal speed. Pay attention to how the compression damping feels and make any desired compression adjustment. No settings work perfectly for every type of terrain, so find the best compromise. Now that you've found your adjustments, record the settings for future reference, making sure to note the location you did your testing at. Tuning your forks requires that you have the correct fork springs and fork oil level. Chances are that if you had to replace your shock spring, you need to replace your fork springs to match. Consult the service manual or a suspension shop for proper fork spring selection and oil level. Once you have the correct springs and fork oil level in your bike, use the same procedures you used to adjust your shock to tune the forks. Start the compression and check to see if they bottom. Then, move to the rebound adjustment, and once that's set, make your final compression adjustment. A special note on forks. If the compression is too stiff, too soft, or the rebound is too slow, the bike will get head shake. Head shake is when the handlebars oscillate violently and usually happens under hard braking or on fast straightaways. A small amount of headshake is normal, but if it's excessive, try turning the compression adjuster in or out until you are satisfied. If the bike still headshakes, return the compression adjuster to its original position and back the rebound adjuster out until the problem no longer persists. Another factor that influences headshake is the fork installation height. This is the distance the fork sticks out above the upper triple clamp. If the fork installation height is set high, the bike may headshake. If the installation height is set low, the bike will have less headshake, but won't turn as well. Like the shock, your final fork adjustments will be a compromise. Once you've made and recorded all your adjustments, stand to the side of the bike and, with your hands on the bars and one foot on the foot peg, push down on the front and rear of the bike with equal force. The forks and shock should compress and rebound at about the same time. If the suspension feels uneven, adjust either the compression or rebound on either the shock or forks until both ends are balanced. Now that you have your suspension tuned, remember that these settings are for the area you are riding at right now. Different riding areas and conditions will require different settings. In general, mud and sand require stiffer compression settings and slower rebound settings. Rocky or very hard terrain calls for softer compression settings. Remember, suspension tuning is not an exact science. Rider ability, preference, and the type of terrain all play a part in tuning suspension. In this video, we have covered the basics of suspension setup. This information is designed to make riding more fun and enjoyable. If you are in question about your suspension needs, please consult a trained technician for further information. Remember, ride safe, have fun, and always wear a helmet.